Good evening, seekers. Tonight, the doors of the Sleep Scholar Archive open once more. If you have wandered these halls before, you may remember the older shelves, the hidden books of magic, and then the long, silent book of the cosmos. We followed candlelight through forbidden libraries and starlight across the ancient dark. But now our path turns downward again, away from the heavens and back toward the earth beneath our feet. This new book is a journey into ancient civilizations, lost knowledge, forgotten temples, buried cities, sacred stones, vanished languages, and the strange things human beings left behind when they tried to speak to eternity. We will move slowly. We will not be here to force every mystery into an answer. We will be here to listen, to notice, and to wonder, because the ancient world does not speak in one clear voice. It speaks in fragments, a broken tablet, a weathered statue, a carved symbol whose meaning has slipped out of memory, a pyramid standing against the desert sky, or a circle of stones arranged with such patience that even after thousands of years, the sun still knows where to rise between them. There is something deeply human in these remains, something familiar even when the language is gone. We look at the ruins of those who came before us, and we recognize questions that have never really left us. Why are we here? What is above us? What waits below? What survives after we are gone? Long before our cities glowed with electric light, people watched the sky from riverbanks and mountain ridges. They followed the seasons by the moon. They measured time by shadows. They buried their dead with objects of care and meaning. They shaped stone, raised walls, painted caves, told stories, named gods, built temples, and left messages for a future they would never see. And somehow, across all that distance, we are that future. Imagine that you are seated inside the archive at midnight. The fire has burned low beside you. A storm moves softly beyond the tall arched windows. On the desk before you lie maps, star charts, clay tablets, sketches of temples, fragments of forgotten languages, and small objects whose purpose is not immediately clear. A stone seal marked with a bird, a piece of blue glass from a city swallowed by sand, and a rubbing taken from an obelisk worn almost smooth by time. These things do not shout. They do not explain themselves. They simply remain. And that may be the first great mystery of ancient civilizations. Not that they vanished, but that so much of them endured. Wood rotted, names faded, empires collapsed, rivers changed course, roads disappeared beneath grass, sand and snow. But still, something stayed behind. Stone held its shape. Fired clay kept its marks. Gold refused to tarnish. Bones slept in the earth. Foundations waited under fields. Slowly, the world became layered with memory, and if we are quiet enough, those traces begin to feel less distant. The people of the ancient world were not symbols. They were not just statues, dynasties, myths, or dates on a timeline. They were people who woke in the morning, worried about weather, watched their children grow, feared illness, argued, prayed, traded, laughed, dreamed, and looked at the same moon that watches over us tonight. They built the world before ours without knowing we would inherit it. So this book begins not with a single city, but with a doorway into the ancient mind. Before we walk among pyramids, temples, tombs, palaces, and lost roads, we must first ask what it means for a civilization to leave knowledge behind. Was knowledge only written in texts? Was it held in the stars, in architecture, in ritual, in memory, in songs, in the careful placement of stones? The answer is not simple. Ancient knowledge was rarely separated into neat little boxes. The sky was not only astronomy, it was time, harvest, navigation, religion, and order. A temple was not only a building, It was a map of the cosmos, a sacred machine, and a bridge between human life and invisible power. To modern eyes, some of this can seem strange. But to the ancient world, mystery was not always the opposite of knowledge. Sometimes mystery was part of knowledge. And so tonight, let us enter gently. Let the archives settle around us. Let the firelight move across the shelves, over the old maps and sleeping books, over the fragments of stone and clay waiting quietly on the desk. Let us begin with ancient civilizations, not as dead places, but as sleeping ones. Cities under sand, temples under vines, names beneath silence, questions beneath stone, waiting patiently for someone to listen. Section 2. A civilization begins long before it has a name. Before the monuments, kings, calendars, and city walls, there is usually something much quieter, a place where people decide to stay. A riverbank that gives water in the dry season, a valley where grain can grow, a coastline where fish return year after year. At first, there may be only a few shelters, a fire, a path worn into the earth by repeated footsteps, and the memory of where food can be found when the weather changes. But slowly, staying changes everything. When people move from place to place, they carry only what they need. When they remain, the world around them begins to gather meaning. A hearth becomes more than a fire pit. A doorway becomes more than an entrance. A burial place becomes more than earth. The people begin to see themselves not only as wanderers beneath the sky, but as keepers of a place. This was one of the great turning points in human history, though it happened slowly, unevenly, and in many parts of the world in different ways. Some communities learned to plant and harvest. Others kept animals. Some continued to hunt, gather, trade, travel, and return. The old story that humans simply became civilized one day is far too neat. The real story is softer and more human. Seeds saved, seasons watched, children taught, and mistakes remembered. Imagine a small settlement near a river thousands of years ago. In the morning, smoke lifts from low roofs. Someone grinds grain against stone. Someone repairs a tool. Someone carries water. Children watch the adults and learn without being formally taught. The older people remember floods, droughts, sickness, good harvests, and bad omens. They know which plants return after rain, which animals move with the seasons, and which stars rise before the cold months arrive. Knowledge is not kept in a single book. It lives in hands, habits, songs, warnings, and daily life. This matters because when we speak of lost knowledge, we often imagine secret scrolls or hidden temples. And sometimes, yes, knowledge was written, guarded, buried, and lost. But much of ancient knowledge was ordinary before it became mysterious. It was the knowledge of when to plant, how to build, where to dig, what to avoid, how to store food, how to mark time, and how to keep a community alive through another year. Only later, when the people are gone and the language has fallen silent, does the ordinary become strange. A clay jar becomes a clue. A pattern in a wall becomes a question. A line of stones becomes a calendar, perhaps, or a boundary, or a sacred path. What was once practical may become symbolic, and what was once symbolic may also have been practical. For early communities, survival and meaning were woven together. The river was not only water, it was life, danger, fertility, travel, and sometimes a god. The sun was not only light, it was warmth, time, order, and return. The dead were not only gone, they were ancestors, memory, warning, comfort, and presence. The land was not merely land, it was home, story, and obligation. From these quiet beginnings, larger patterns formed. Paths became roads, storehouses became centers of power, Seasonal gatherings became markets, festivals, or rituals. Leaders emerged through strength, wisdom, or control of food, water, trade, and sacred knowledge. Specialists appeared: potters, builders, healers, metalworkers, scribes, priests, astronomers, sailors, and those who learned to measure the world in ways others could not. Once a society can store more than it needs for the present moment, it can begin to dream in longer spans of time. It can build a wall that will take years to finish. It can carve a monument no single person may live to see completed. It can make a map, a law, a calendar, a myth, or a tomb meant to last beyond the breath of the one who ordered it. This is where civilization becomes visible to us, when lives began to leave larger marks on the world. Stone foundations, irrigation channels, pottery shards, city walls, temple platforms, writing tablets, trade goods, and graves arranged with care. These are the traces that survive after voices fade, and yet even the largest ancient city began with smaller human acts. Someone chose a place, someone lit a fire, someone planted seeds, someone remembered where the river rose last year, someone told a child, "This is how we do it." And the child listened and one day told another. In this way, civilization was not born from stone alone. It was born from memory, repeated until it became a world. Section 3. The first cities did not arrive like sudden miracles. They gathered themselves slowly, one human need at a time. A few homes became many homes. A path became a street. A shared storehouse became a center. A place where people met to trade, pray, mourn, and make decisions began to feel different from the land around it. It was no longer only a settlement. It was becoming a world with an inside and an outside, with rules, rhythms, dangers, promises, and memory. To us, a city can seem ordinary. We are used to streets, markets, officials, records, buildings, and the restless sound of many lives pressed close together. But in the deep past, the rise of cities was one of the strangest experiments humanity ever attempted. A city asked people to live among strangers, and that changed nearly everything. In a small community, memory can live in the people themselves. Everyone knows who repaired the roof, who promised grain, who was born in spring, who died in winter, and which families are bound together by marriage, debt, or grief. But as settlements grew, memory needed help. It needed marks, tokens, seals, tablets, and eventually writing. It needed people who could count grain, measure land, record offerings, and keep track of what the human mind alone could no longer hold. And so, in many ancient places, administration and mystery grew side by side. The same world that gave us storehouses and tax records also gave us temples, rituals, sacred calendars, and priestly knowledge. Ancient cities were practical, but they were not only practical, they were places where daily survival and sacred order were woven together. A wall might protect a city from enemies, but it also marked a boundary between the known and the unknown. A gate might allow travelers to enter, but it also became a symbol of passage. A temple might stand above the houses, visible from far away, not simply as a place of worship, but as the center of a shared world. The city did not merely shelter people, it told them where they belonged. Picture one of these early cities at dusk. Workers return from fields beyond the walls. Animals move through dusty lanes. Bread bakes in clay ovens. Someone carries water. A potter smooths wet clay with practiced fingers. A scribe presses marks into a tablet while the light still holds. Above the rooftops, the temple rises, and smoke from small hearths lifts slowly into the darkening air. There is nothing simple about such a place. It is a living web of labor, belief, hunger, ambition, fear, skill, and hope. It depends on farmers, builders, traders carrying stories from distant lands, priests watching signs in the sky, and rulers learning that power is strongest when it can make itself feel ancient. This is where architecture becomes more than shelter. A house says, "We live here." A wall says, "We defend this." A road says, "We travel this way." But a temple says something larger. It says, "Our world has a center." It says, "The gods, the ancestors, the sky, the ruler, the river, and the people are bound together here." The people who built these places believed space could be shaped into meaning. That idea appears again and again in the ancient world. Cities were not always arranged by accident. Streets, gates, monuments, tombs, altars, and towers often carried messages. Some were messages of power, some were messages of devotion, some were messages to the living, and some were meant for the dead. A city could become a map of how a civilization understood the universe. This is why ruins can feel so haunting. When a city falls silent, its practical life disappears first. The market empties, the ovens cool, the voices leave the streets, but the larger shapes remain: the gate, the platform, the sacred road, the palace foundation. The stones are lined toward a sunrise no one gathers to watch anymore. What remains is not the city as it was, but the skeleton of its meaning. And when we stand before that skeleton, we are tempted to ask, what was lost? Was it technology, ritual, a secret language, a forgotten science of stone, water, stars, or sound? Sometimes the answer may be yes, but often what was lost is even harder to recover. The shared understanding that made every wall, path, and symbol feel alive. A ruin is not only a broken building, it is a sentence with missing words. The task of the seeker is not to fill every gap with fantasy, or to strip every mystery away until nothing is left but dust. The task is to remain patient in the doorway between knowing and not knowing. Tonight, as the archive grows quieter around us, we begin to understand that civilization was never only about survival. It was about arranging people, seasons, grain, gods, stories, ancestors, and stars into a pattern that could be lived inside. The first cities were places where humanity began building worlds within the world. Section 4. If the first cities were worlds within the world, then the river was often the first great teacher. Again and again, when we look toward the oldest civilizations, we find water moving through the center of the story. The Nile carrying black soil into Egypt, the Tigris and Euphrates bending through Mesopotamia, the Indus flowing beside planned streets and baked brick, the Yellow River shaping early China with both nourishment and danger. These rivers were not scenery. They were clocks, roads, borders, threats, blessings, and mysteries. To live beside a river was to live beside change. Water rose and fell, banks shifted, floods came too early, too late, too gently, or with terrible force. A river could feed a field one season and erase a village the next. It could carry boats, trade, news, strangers, disease, offerings, and stories. It could divide people, and it could bind them together. Long before maps were drawn in ink, rivers drew lines across human life. This is why ancient knowledge so often began with watching. People learned the moods of water because their lives depended on it. They noticed when certain stars appeared before a flood, when birds changed their paths, when insects rose from the reeds, when the air itself seemed to soften before rain. Over generations, observation became memory, and memory became tradition. A farmer did not need to call this science for it to be careful. A priest did not need to separate calculation from prayer. A builder did not need to choose between practical skill and sacred meaning. In the ancient world, these things often belonged to one another. The river could be measured and worshipped. The sky could be studied and feared. A flood could be both a natural event and a message from the powers that held the world together. Imagine standing at the edge of the Nile before sunrise. The air is cool. The reeds are dark. Somewhere nearby, cattle stir, and the first smoke of morning rises from low houses. The river moves with a quiet strength that feels older than any one person. Along its banks, people have learned to wait for the flood that renews the land. They have learned to store grain, mark seasons, dig channels, repair fields, and honor the pattern that keeps hunger away for another year. In such a place, time itself becomes circular. The river rises, the river falls, the soil darkens, the crops grow, the harvest comes, and then the waiting begins again. This rhythm enters the imagination. It shapes calendars, myths, ceremonies, and ideas about death and return. If the land can be renewed after it seems drowned, perhaps life also has hidden passages. Perhaps the sun, sinking each evening into darkness, is not lost but traveling. Perhaps the dead are not simply gone, but moving through another kind of river. This is how landscapes become sacred, not because ancient people were unable to understand nature, but because they understood that nature held their lives completely. The mountain was not only stone, the desert was not only emptiness, the river was not only water. Each place had behavior, danger, memory, and presence. And so civilizations learned to build in conversation with the land. Temples rose where the horizon mattered. Tombs faced directions filled with meaning. Cities grew near water, but above flood. Roads followed valleys, coastlines, and passes through mountains. Sacred sites were placed where earth and sky seemed to meet in a way people could feel, even if they could not fully explain it. To us, ancient monuments can sometimes look like isolated wonders. A pyramid here, a temple there, a ring of stones standing alone beneath the weather. But to the people who made them, they belong to a larger world of rivers, stars, seasons, hills, winds, ancestors, and gods. A monument was not just an object, it was a point of connection. This matters as we begin our journey, because lost civilizations were never separate from their landscapes. Their knowledge was rooted in soil, water, weather, animals, stone, and sky. To understand what they built, we must also ask where they built it and why that place mattered. The earth kept teaching, and human beings kept answering. They answered with canals, fields, boats, walls, shrines, calendars, stories, and stones set carefully into place. Some answers were practical, some were sacred, most were both. And here, in the quiet of the archive, with the old map spread open before us, we can begin to see the ancient world not as a collection of separate ruins, but as a set of conversations between people and place. The river speaks in flood and silence. The mountain speaks in shadow. The desert speaks in distance. The sky speaks in returning lights. And somewhere in that listening, civilization begins to find its shape. Section 5. Long before ancient knowledge was carved into monuments, it was carried in memory, a story repeated by a fire, a warning given before a journey, a song that told when the rains would come, a pattern of stars taught from one generation to the next. These were not lesser forms of knowledge because they were not written down. For most of human history, memory was the library, and the human voice was the shelf on which the world was kept. This is easy to forget now. We live in an age that trusts records. If something matters, we expect it to be saved in writing, stored in a file, printed in a book, or preserved somewhere outside the body. But for the people of the ancient world, memory had to be trained and shared. A community survived by remembering the seasons, the behavior of animals, the paths through unfamiliar land, and the stories that explained how life should be lived. To remember was not passive. It was work. It required rhythm, repetition, ritual, and attention. This is why so many old traditions took the form of songs, chants, ceremonies, and stories. A fact placed inside a story can travel farther than a fact spoken plainly. A warning wrapped in myth may be remembered long after ordinary advice is forgotten. In the archive, we often imagine knowledge as something quiet and still, a tablet under glass, a scroll in a cabinet, a book sleeping on a shelf. But in the beginning, knowledge moved. It lived in breath. It passed from mouth to ear, from parent to child, from elder to apprentice. It changed slightly as it moved, but it endured because people needed it to endure. Imagine an elder beside a small fire as night settles over a settlement. Younger listeners gather not only to be entertained, but to be taught. The tale may begin with animals, spirits, heroes, or ancestors, yet beneath the surface there may be instructions: where not to go after dark, which river crossing is dangerous, why a mountain must be respected, or when the cold season begins. The story becomes a vessel. It carries memory across time. This helps us understand why ancient myths should not be treated as simple inventions, nor as perfect reports of events exactly as they happened. They are often something in between. They may preserve echoes of migrations, floods, droughts, old wars, lost places, or landscapes that shaped a people's world. They may also preserve emotional truths: fear of chaos, longing for order, grief for the dead, gratitude for harvest, and the hope that human life belongs to a pattern larger than itself. When writing appears, it does not replace memory all at once. It joins it. Clay tablets, carved stones, painted walls, knotted cords, and early scripts become new ways for knowledge to stay. But writing also changes knowledge. It allows records to outlive the voice that spoke them. It allows laws, debts, prayers, names, and royal claims to travel beyond the limits of memory. It gives power to those who can read it and mystery to those who cannot. A written sign is a strange thing. To one person, it is only a mark. To another, it is a voice returning from silence. This is why ancient inscriptions still feel powerful. They are not merely decorations, they are attempts to cross time. Someone pressed a reed into wet clay or cut a symbol into stone, believing the mark would matter after the hand was gone. And it did. Here we are, centuries and sometimes thousands of years later, still leaning close to read what remains. Yet even writing leaves gaps. Many ancient voices were never recorded. The poor, the children, the travelers, the farmers, and the makers of ordinary things often appear only in traces: a tool worn smooth by use, a footprint, a repaired bowl, a house foundation, a small charm buried near a doorway. These are quieter texts, but they are still texts of a kind. They ask us to read not only words, but lives. So when we speak of lost knowledge, we should remember that not all of it was hidden in secret chambers. Some vanished because the last person who knew a song stopped singing. Some vanished because a language no longer had children to speak it. Some vanished because a city emptied, a road was abandoned, or a way of watching the world was no longer needed. In the soft light of the archive, this is a humbling thought. Knowledge is not only discovered, It is cared for. It must be spoken, practiced, copied, taught, and remembered. Otherwise, even important things can become quiet. And tonight, we carry that idea with us. Ancient civilization was built not only from stone and water, but from memory given shape, from stories strong enough to survive the dark, and from voices reaching forward, hoping someone would still be listening. Section 6. Once people began to build worlds within the world, they also began to measure the heavens above them. To the ancient mind, the sky was not distant. It was part of daily life. It told people when to plant, when to travel, when to gather, and when to expect cold, flood, heat, or rain. The sky was a clock, a calendar, a map, a warning, and a mystery all at once. Before written calendars were common, people watched the returning lights. They noticed that certain stars appeared at certain times of year. They watched the moon grow, vanish, and return. They saw the sun rise and set in slightly different places along the horizon as the seasons changed. Over many generations, these observations became a quiet architecture in the mind. The world above was moving, but not randomly. It had rhythm, and rhythm is one of the first forms of trust. If the moon returns, perhaps order remains. If the sun comes back after winter, perhaps darkness is not final. If the flood follows the star, perhaps the sky and river are speaking to one another in a language older than human words. This is why ancient astronomy was rarely only astronomy. It belonged to farming, navigation, ritual, rulership, myth, and death. To know the sky was to know something powerful. It meant understanding when the world would change before the change had fully arrived. It meant seeing patterns invisible to the hurried eye. Imagine a watcher standing on a ridge before dawn. The settlement below is still dark. The fires are low. The animals are quiet. But on the eastern horizon, just above the edge of the land, a familiar star appears after being absent for many nights. To us, it may be only a point of light. To the watcher, it may be a sign that a season is turning, that fields must be prepared, that a ceremony is near, or that a river will soon begin its ancient work. Such knowledge would feel almost magical to those who did not possess it. But it was not magic in the simple sense of illusion. It was patience. It was memory sharpened over time. It was the result of looking and looking again until the sky became readable. Across the ancient world, people found ways to bring the heavens down to earth. They aligned stones with solstices. They oriented temples toward important points on the horizon. They built passageways where sunlight entered only on certain days. They shaped monuments so that shadow, dawn, moonrise, or starlight could turn architecture into an event. A building could wait all year for one beam of light. A stone chamber, silent through wind and weather, might suddenly fill with sunrise on a particular morning. For the people gathered there, this would not have felt like decoration. It would have felt like confirmation that the world was still ordered, that the old pattern had returned, and that human hands had built a place capable of receiving it. This is one reason ancient monuments can feel so alive even in ruin. They were not always meant to be understood from a single glance. Some were meant to work with time. A doorway, a shadow, a line of stones, or the angle of a wall might only reveal its meaning under the right sky. The sky also gave rulers a language of power. A king who claimed harmony with the heavens was not merely saying he was strong, he was saying his rule belonged to the order of the universe. A temple aligned with the sun could suggest that the city itself stood in proper relation to the cosmos. A calendar controlled by priests or scribes could shape labor, festivals, taxes, and sacred life. Yet beneath the politics and ceremony, there remains a simpler human truth. Ancient people looked upward because the sky was beautiful, terrifying, dependable, and impossible to own. It stretched over kings and farmers alike. It watched over the living and the dead. It made human life feel small, but not meaningless. In the archive tonight, we can picture those early sky watchers not as primitive dreamers, but as patient observers beneath an enormous darkness. They had no modern telescopes, no satellites, no glowing screens filled with data. They had eyes, memory, stories, and time. And with these, they learned enough to build calendars, guide journeys, shape temples, and weave the stars into the structure of civilization. The ancient sky was not empty space. It was a ceiling of signs, a dark ocean of returning lights, and one of humanity's first great books. Before knowledge was written onto clay or parchment, it was read in the moon, in the stars, in the color of dawn, and in the long shadow of a stone placed carefully beneath the turning heavens. Section 7. When ancient people built upward, they were often trying to reach more than height. A temple, a tower, a pyramid, a shrine on a hill, or a platform rising above a city was rarely only a display of skill. It changed the way the world felt. It pulled the eyes toward one place. It gathered footsteps, offerings, songs, processions, and silence. It gave a community a center that could be seen from far away, and sometimes it made the invisible feel almost near. To build a sacred place is to say that this ground is different from other ground. Here, the ordinary world thins. Here, the living may speak to the gods, the ancestors, the heavens, or the powers below the earth. Here, stone is not only stone, and steps are not only steps. Every wall, doorway, chamber, and path can become part of a journey. This is why sacred architecture appears again and again in ancient civilizations. In Mesopotamia, great temple platforms rose above the flat land like artificial mountains. In Egypt, temple avenues and pyramid fields turned the landscape into a theater of eternity. In Mesoamerica, pyramids climbed toward the sky in stepped layers, their summits becoming places of ceremony, sacrifice, and cosmic order. Across many lands, people shaped space so that movement itself became meaningful. A person did not simply enter a temple. They approached it. They saw it from a distance. They passed through gates, courtyards, shadows, columns, thresholds, and sometimes into smaller, darker rooms where only certain people could go. The building taught the body what the mind should feel: reverence, patience, fear, wonder, obedience, or peace. Imagine walking toward an ancient temple at night, long after the crowds have gone. The stones still hold a little warmth from the day. The air smells faintly of dust, smoke, and old offerings. Moonlight lies across the steps. Above, the stars turn slowly. The temple does not need to move to feel alive. It has been shaped to wait. That waiting is part of its power. Many sacred buildings were made to last beyond a single lifetime. The people who cut the stone, hauled the blocks, painted the walls, or raised the scaffolds may never have seen the finished form. Their labor entered something larger than themselves. A monument is a strange kind of promise that the world will continue, that the gods will still be honored, that the dead will still be remembered, that the people will still know where the center is. And yet, these places were not only spiritual, they were also social, political, and economic. Temples could hold wealth, they could organize labor, they could own land, store grain, record offerings, and support specialists. The sacred center often became a center of power because whoever controlled the place where meaning gathered also controlled part of the community's imagination. This does not make the sacred false, it makes it human. Ancient people lived in worlds where power and devotion were often braided together. A ruler might build a temple to honor a god, but also to make his own name endure. A priest might guard a ritual because it was holy, but also because guarded knowledge creates authority. A city might celebrate a festival because it loved the old story, but also because shared ceremonies hold people together. The temple, then, was a meeting place of many needs. It could be a house for a god, a storehouse for grain, a symbol of rule, a calendar of stone, a stage for ritual, and a memory machine built to outlast ordinary speech. This is why ruins of sacred places can still move us. Even when the god is no longer worshipped there, even when the language is gone, even when the roof has fallen and the altar is broken, the shape remains. We can still feel that the place was meant to gather attention. We can still sense that people once approached it carefully. We can still understand, without fully understanding, that the builders were trying to place human life in relation to something vast. In the archive tonight, the old drawings of temples and towers lie open on the desk. Their lines are quiet, but they suggest footsteps, chants, candles, drums, incense, dawn light, and hands pressed against stone. They remind us that ancient civilization was not only a matter of feeding bodies and defending walls, it was also a matter of arranging awe. And perhaps that is one reason these monuments endure in the mind. They do not merely show us what people could build, they show us what people believed was worth building for. A sacred place is a question made solid. What stands above us? What holds us together? What must be remembered when we are gone? The ancient builders answered with stone, height, shadow, and light. Section 8. Every civilization must decide what to do with the dead. This may sound like a sorrowful beginning, but it is also one of the deepest doorways into the ancient mind. Few things reveal a people more clearly than the way they bury, burn, preserve, honor, fear, or remember those who have left the living world. A grave is never only a place where a body rests. It is a statement about what the living believe death means. Some ancient communities buried their dead beneath houses, keeping ancestors close to the daily life of the family. Others placed them in cemeteries beyond the settlement, where the living crossed a boundary to visit them. Some built tombs meant to last for ages. Some used caves, mounds, chambers, pits, jars, boats, pyramids, or stone-lined graves. Some gave the dead food, tools, jewelry, weapons, masks, or charms. These choices were not random. They were a language of care, fear, hope, and memory. To modern eyes, grave goods can seem like simple objects: a bowl, a bead, a knife, a necklace. But placed beside the dead, an object becomes something else. It may be a gift for a journey, a sign of status, a token of love, protection against danger, or a reminder of who that person was among the living. Imagine an ancient burial at twilight. The ground has been opened carefully. The people gathered there speak softly, or perhaps they sing. Someone places a vessel beside the body. Someone else adds a charm, a tool, or a folded cloth. A child watches from behind an adult's shoulder, learning without being told that the dead must be treated with attention. The ceremony may be simple, but it is not empty. It is the living trying to answer the silence. In many ancient worlds, the dead were not gone in the way we often imagine. They remained near, powerful, watchful, or in need of care. They might become ancestors, spirits, guides, dangers, or members of a hidden community beyond ordinary sight. To remember them properly was not only sentimental, it could be a duty. The living gave offerings, spoke names, visited resting places, and built monuments so memory would not collapse too quickly into dust. This is why names mattered so much. A name could hold a person in the world after breath had left the body. To erase a name was a kind of second death. To carve a name into stone was to ask time to be gentle. Across the ancient world, people fought against forgetting with clay, paint, bone, wood, gold, and stone. Tombs also show us how ancient civilizations thought about order. Some burials were humble, others were enormous statements of wealth and authority. A ruler's tomb could become a landscape of power, filled with treasures, symbols, and architecture meant to guide the soul beyond death and remind the living who had ruled them. In such places, belief and politics met in the dark. Yet we should be careful. Not every object in a grave can be explained with certainty. Archaeologists can study position, material, age, wear, comparison, and context. But the inner meaning of a burial is not always recoverable. A shell may be decoration, trade, memory, protection, or all of these at once. This uncertainty is not a failure. It is part of the quiet. A tomb is intimate, and intimacy resists complete explanation. In the archive tonight, the drawings of burial chambers seem especially still. A painted wall, a sealed doorway, a row of offerings, a body turned toward the east, a mask looking upward with calm, unreadable eyes. These are not only artifacts, they are the remains of grief shaped into form, and grief is one of the oldest human teachers. It asks what a person is when the body becomes still. It asks whether love can cross a boundary. It asks whether memory is enough, whether the soul travels, whether the ancestors listen, and whether death belongs to the same great pattern as sunset, winter, seed, and return. Ancient civilizations answered these questions in many ways. Some imagined underworlds, some imagined journeys across water, judgment halls, fields of peace, mountains of ancestors, or stars where the dead might continue. But again and again, they treated death as meaningful. That meaning helped shape the living world. Tombs required labor, ancestor rituals shaped families, funeral customs preserved stories, beliefs about death influenced kingship, morality, art, architecture, and the measurement of time. The dead were not outside civilization. They were part of its foundation. So, as we move deeper into this book, we should remember that ancient cities were inhabited not only by the living, they were surrounded by graves, guarded by ancestors, haunted by names, and built under the gaze of those who had gone before. To understand the ancient world, we must listen not only to palaces and temples, but to the quiet places where people placed their dead with trembling hands, hoping that something of them would remain. Section 9. Long before a civilization leaves behind a written history, it leaves behind the work of human hands. This is one of the quietest ways the ancient world survives. Not through the voices of kings or the claims carved on palace walls, but through the things people made because life required them to make something. A vessel to hold water, a tool shaped for work, a wall raised against weather, a road worn into the land by trade, habit, and return. These objects may seem small beside temples and city walls, but they carry a different kind of truth. A monument often tells us what a ruler wanted remembered. Craft tells us what a people needed to know in order to live. To make something well is to understand the world closely. Clay has to be felt before it can be shaped. Stone has to be studied before it can be cut. Metal has to be heated, watched, and trusted only at the right moment. Wood, fiber, pigment, leather, glass, and bone each have their own behavior. None of them obey the careless hand. Ancient makers learned these things slowly. Their knowledge was not always written down, and perhaps much of it could not be written down easily. It lived in touch, timing, pressure, sound, color, and instinct. A craftsperson knew when a material was ready because the body had learned to recognize it. The hands remembered what language might fail to explain. This kind of knowledge is easy to underestimate because it is practical. But practical knowledge is not simple knowledge. It is the knowledge that keeps a house standing, a harvest stored, a boat moving, a blade sharp, a roof sealed, and a community prepared for another season. Without it, no temple rises, no road reaches another city, no trade crosses a desert, no archive preserves its tablets in the first place. Imagine a maker working by lamplight after the day's heat has faded. The room is quiet except for the sound of tools and the small movements of breath. The work is not dramatic. There is no grand speech, no royal procession, no priestly chant. There is only patience. A hand adjusts, tests, smooths, measures, and begins again. The object slowly becomes what it is meant to be. In that patience, we find one of civilization's hidden foundations. Trade carried this knowledge outward. When people exchanged goods, they also exchanged methods, styles, habits, and stories. A technique learned in one valley might travel with merchants to a distant coast. A new way of shaping metal, sealing a jar, dyeing cloth, or building with stone might pass from workshop to workshop until no single person remembered where it began. So the ancient world was never made of sealed, separate worlds. It was threaded together by movement. Roads, rivers, caravan paths, and sea routes carried more than materials. They carried trust, suspicion, rumor, imitation, competition, and wonder. A person might see a foreign object and understand immediately that somewhere beyond the horizon, another people had solved a problem differently. That realization can change a civilization. It can teach builders to build higher, sailors to travel farther, rulers to desire rarer things, and artists to imagine new forms. Sometimes a borrowed technique becomes so natural in its new home that it feels ancient there too. Knowledge does not always belong to one place. It moves, settles, changes shape, and becomes part of another people's memory. And yet, craft can also disappear with surprising ease. If a workshop closes, if a language dies, if a trade route breaks, if a material becomes scarce, if a younger generation no longer learns the old method, then knowledge can vanish without a fire, conquest, or disaster. It simply stops passing from hand to hand. This is one reason ancient objects can feel mysterious even when they were ordinary. We may know what something is, but not exactly how it was made. We may understand the result, but not the practiced sequence that produced it. The finished object remains, while the living knowledge behind it has gone quiet. In the archive tonight, the shelves of crafted things feel less like a collection and more like a room full of unfinished conversations. Each object was once part of someone's labor, someone's problem, someone's day. It belonged to a world of heat, dust, water, trade, skill, and need. It passed through hands that may never have written their own names, and yet those hands still speak through the work. So let us remember the makers as we move deeper into the ancient world. Not only the kings who ordered monuments, or the priests who guarded sacred places, but the builders, potters, weavers, smiths, sailors, farmers, and traders whose knowledge made civilization touchable. They shaped the ordinary things that allowed extraordinary things to exist. Through their work, the past does not merely stand at a distance, it rests quietly in the human hand. Section 10. There comes a point in every ancient civilization when knowledge begins to gather around power. At first, knowledge may belong to anyone who has lived long enough to learn it. The farmer understands the field, the sailor understands the wind, the healer understands the body, the builder understands weight, balance, and stone. But as communities grow larger, some kinds of knowledge become more guarded. They move behind temple walls, into palace rooms, into the hands of scribes, priests, rulers, and those trusted to keep the records. This does not happen because ancient people suddenly become secretive in some simple way. It happens because knowledge becomes valuable. A calendar can organize labor. A map can guide trade. A ritual can unite a city. A record can prove ownership. The person who knows how to measure land, count grain, interpret signs, or speak the sacred words stands close to the center of things. In the ancient world, literacy itself could be a kind of power. To read marks that others could not read was to hear a voice hidden in clay or stone. To write was to make memory official. A spoken agreement might fade, but a recorded one could remain. A king's order, once carved or pressed into a tablet, seemed to stand outside ordinary breath. It could outlive the person who commanded it. Imagine the quiet room of a scribe. The city outside is full of movement, but here the work is precise and still. A hand prepares the surface, a mark is made, then another. Names, offerings, labor, debts, prayers, warnings, and victories are turned into signs. The living world is being narrowed into symbols so that it can be carried forward without depending entirely on memory. There is something beautiful in that, and something dangerous. Writing preserves, but it also chooses. It saves some voices and loses others. It remembers the ruler more easily than the laborer, the temple more easily than the home, the conquest more easily than the ordinary life beneath it. Much of what we know about the ancient world comes through the hands of people who had reason to record certain things and ignore others, so the past reaches us unevenly. It arrives with gaps, silences, exaggerations, and accidents. A palace archive may survive while a village disappears. A royal inscription may shout across thousands of years while the people who carried the stones remain unnamed. This does not make the record useless. It means we must listen carefully to both what is said and what is missing. The keepers of knowledge were not all alike. Some served kings, some served temples, some watched the sky, some copied old stories because they believed the words were sacred, useful, or too beautiful to lose. They were human beings working within the pressures of their own worlds. Some preserved wisdom, some protected power. Often they did both without separating the two. This is why the idea of lost knowledge carries such a strong pull. We sense that somewhere in the broken record, something important has slipped away. Not only secret formulas or hidden sciences, but entire ways of seeing the world, ways of connecting sky to season, building to belief, ancestor to household, ruler to ritual, and memory to place. When a civilization falls, its knowledge does not vanish all at once. Some of it is copied by others. Some is absorbed into new cultures. Some survives as custom, myth, technique, or symbol long after its original meaning has changed. And some is truly lost, not because it was never valuable, but because no one remained who could read it, practice it, or explain why it mattered. In the archive tonight, this thought settles heavily but softly. Around us are imagined records resting in warm shadow, old tablets, folded maps, temple plans, and star charts marked by hands that are gone. Yet even here, in a room made for remembering, we can feel the limits of preservation. The past is not a complete book waiting to be opened. It is a damaged manuscript, rescued from water and fire, with whole pages missing, and others written in languages we are still learning to hear, and maybe that is why we return to it. not because the ancient world gives us easy answers, but because it teaches patience. It teaches us that knowledge is fragile. It must be guarded, shared, copied, questioned, and kept alive. It teaches us that power can preserve truth, but also bend it. It reminds us that every age chooses what to remember, and every age leaves something behind. As the fire lowers in the archive and the storm moves beyond the windows, we continue our journey with this in mind. The stones, texts, ruins, and legends ahead will not speak with perfect clarity, but they will speak. And if we listen gently, we may begin to hear not only what ancient civilizations knew, but what they feared forgetting. Section 11. Every civilization also leaves behind silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence that comes after meaning has moved out of reach. A symbol remains, but the voice that explained it is gone. A temple stands, but the procession that once gave it life no longer moves through its gates. A road can still be traced across the land, though no one remembers the songs of the travelers who used it. The past does not disappear evenly. It fades in patches, leaving some things sharp and others almost impossible to see. This is where the work of the seeker becomes delicate. It is tempting to treat every gap as a secret, and every uncertainty as proof that something extraordinary has been hidden from us. But silence is not always conspiracy. Sometimes it is weather, sometimes it is time. Sometimes it is a burned library, a broken language, a city abandoned slowly, or a tradition that stopped being taught because the world around it changed. And yet, silence is not nothing. A missing piece can shape the whole mystery. When we do not know why a structure was built, or how a ritual was performed, or what a certain mark once meant, the imagination begins to move toward the empty space. This is natural. Human beings are pattern-seeking creatures. We do not like unfinished stories. We want the lost page, the hidden chamber, the final translation, the one clear answer that makes the whole ruin speak. But ancient civilizations rarely give themselves to us that easily. They ask for a slower kind of attention. Imagine standing before a weathered wall in the last blue light of evening. The stone is carved, but not completely. Some signs remain clear. Others have been softened by centuries of wind. You can see that someone wanted to communicate, but not everything they meant has survived. The wall is both present and distant. It offers evidence, but not confession. This is one of the strange beauties of studying the ancient world. We are always close to human beings and always separated from them. We can touch the stones they touched. We can walk through doorways they built. We can see the horizon from places they chose with care. But we cannot fully step into their minds. We can only approach. That approach matters. It keeps us humble. It reminds us that the past was not waiting for us like a puzzle designed to be solved. It was lived forward by people who did not know what would survive, who did not imagine their broken walls would become our questions. Their world was complete to them, even if it reaches us in fragments. So we must be careful with mystery. If we strip it away too quickly, we flatten the ancient world into a set of facts. If we fill it too quickly with fantasy, we stop listening to what remains. The better path lies somewhere between certainty and invention, where wonder and patience can sit together. In the Sleep Scholar archive, this is the kind of mystery we will follow. Not the loud kind that demands every shadow become a secret door, but the quiet kind that asks us to remain with the unknown for a little while. We will look at ruins, myths, monuments, and lost places with curiosity, but also with respect. We will allow the ancient world to be strange without forcing it to become impossible. There is comfort in that. At night, when the fire burns low and the windows darken, Uncertainty does not have to feel like failure. It can feel like depth. It can remind us that not everything meaningful must be fully possessed. Some things can be approached softly, like a distant light through rain. The ancient past is filled with such lights. Some are clear enough to guide us. Others flicker at the edge of understanding. A vanished city may leave only foundations, but those foundations still tell us that people once gathered there. A lost language may resist translation, but its marks still prove that someone believed words could cross time. A broken statue may have lost its face, but not the intention that shaped it. As we continue through this book, we will meet many silences. Some will surround real mysteries of construction, memory, religion, astronomy, disappearance, and survival. Some will come from the limits of evidence. Some will come from the simple fact that human lives are always larger than the records they leave behind. And that is all right. The archive does not require every door to open at once. Tonight, it is enough to stand before the closed ones and listen. The silence of ancient civilizations is not dead silence. It is the hush of something far away, still waiting for careful footsteps, patient eyes, and a mind willing to wonder without rushing to claim. Section 12. And so, before we step into the first great civilization of this book, we pause for a moment at the threshold. The archive is quiet now. The fire has settled into a low amber glow, and beyond the tall windows, the night continues its slow movement over the mountains. On the desk, the maps remain open. Their inked rivers wind through deserts and valleys. Their old coastlines curve toward forgotten harbors. Their little marks for temples, tombs, and ruined cities seem almost to breathe in the candlelight. This first chapter has not been about one place, but about preparation. We have been learning how to look at a ruin and see more than broken stone, to look at a river and understand why people built beside it, feared it, worshipped it, and trusted their lives to its return, to look at a city not only as walls and streets, but as memory arranged into space, to look at a temple and feel how architecture can gather awe, to look at silence and resist the urge to fill it too quickly. The ancient world asks this of us. It asks for patience before certainty. It asks us to slow down enough to notice that knowledge can live in many forms. It may be written on clay, carried in ritual, measured in shadow, shaped into a wall, whispered in a story, or preserved in the practiced motion of a hand. Some of it survived clearly. Some of it changed names. Some of it was absorbed by later peoples, and some of it faded until only traces remained. But traces matter. A trace is not nothing. It is a faint line between the vanished and the present. It tells us that someone stood there before us, solving problems, making meaning, burying their dead, watching the sky, and building a world that felt complete to them. We do not need to turn every trace into a grand secret for it to be worth our attention. Sometimes the wonder is simple. They were here, and now we are here, and something made by their lives has crossed the dark between us. That is the spirit in which this book will move. We will travel through ancient landscapes with care. We will visit civilizations whose names still echo through history and others whose voices are much harder to hear. We will stand near rivers, deserts, mountains, temples, roads, tombs, observatories, and buried cities, but not as collectors rushing from one marvel to the next. We will move as listeners. We will let each place teach us how it wanted to be understood. There will be mysteries ahead. Some will be famous, worn smooth by retelling. Others will be smaller and quieter, hidden in the way a city was planned, the way a monument faced the sky, or the way a people remembered their dead. We will meet lost languages, sacred buildings, strange alignments, vanished settlements, and stories that refuse to settle into one meaning. But we will not chase mystery for noise. We will follow it for depth, because the best mysteries do not only ask what happened, they ask what it meant. What did it mean to build toward the heavens? What did it mean to bury objects with the dead? What did it mean to bind a city to a river, a ruler to a god, a calendar to the stars, or a story to the memory of a people? These questions do not always lead to simple answers, but they open the ancient world in a gentler way. Tonight's chapter has been the opening of the door. We have seen civilization as something born from place, memory, craft, power, ritual, and the long human desire to leave something behind. Now, in the chapters to come, we can begin walking through that door. The archive will keep its lamp lit, the maps will remain open, and when we return, we will follow the first long road into the old world, where rivers taught people to measure time, where stone began to carry memory, and where human beings first learned to build not only shelters, but meanings that could outlast them. For now, let the room grow still around you. Let the fire soften. Let the storm move far beyond the glass. The ancient cities are waiting in the dark, not loudly, not urgently, but patiently, as all old things wait. And when you are ready, we will listen.